All right, I am joined here by Colton Bennett, who is running for the Idaho House of Representatives, District 6, Seat A. So, without, any fanfare, let's go to him. Colton, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure. And so just, start from the beginning. Who are you? What's your background? What is your journey that brought you to this point where you are standing for public office?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Colton Bennett. I'm a Christian, a conservative, a husband, a father, a United States Army veteran. When I enlisted in the United States Army, I took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution against all enemies, whether they're foreign or domestic. And I meant every word of it. And I don't believe that oath ends when I hang up the uniform. And so I moved here to Idaho to be with my wife. She was living here at the time when I got back to the United States from Poland. And so Idaho was pitched to me as the last bastion of freedom. And in many ways it is. In many ways it is. But we have a lot of work to do here. And I quickly came to the realization that liberty is under attack in Idaho. Our government is growing, our spending is ballooning, and there is work to do. There are a lot of individuals that occupy positions of power that represent themselves to be conservatives, but they aren't. They sound more like a Portland conservative. So when I first started getting involved in local politics, I was concerned about these issues and so on. And we're currently represented by Representative Lori McCann. And Representative McCann has had a tenacious relationship with conservatives over the last few years. A lot of promises were made about conservative values, but those promises weren't necessarily kept. Well, they weren't kept. And I like Representative McCann. I think she's a very nice person. I also think that what you do with nice people is you invite them to dinner. You don't elect them to office. And so looking at these things, I was very concerned about the direction of our state, the direction of our community, and I was also concerned with how we were being represented in Boise. And I believe we needed a conservative voice. So I decided to get into this race because I feel that liberty is under attack. And I have a duty that stems from the fact that I took an oath to defend our Constitution. So I got into this race in September, and it has been amazing. I've met so many people. I've heard so many concerns and issues on their minds, from property tax to the pro-life issue, from protecting our dams up here in northern Idaho to the Second Amendment. And I'm committed to fighting for those and conservative values in this election. So that is, in a nutshell, why I'm in this race.
I'm looking at a map of your district. So I'm
Yeah.
still getting myself familiar with geography, especially of the areas I'm, further away from where I live down here in the Treasure Valley. You've got, Latah County, part of Nez Perce County, Lewis County. So at one end you have the Nez Perce Reservation. At the other end you have Moscow, which is not only a college town, but it's also where, it gets a lot of national attention due to the, you know, activities there, Pastor Doug Wilson, etc. It looks like a really varied and diverse district. What have you learned living there and campaigning there and talking to people? What's unique about it? What are people concerned about, and how are you going to represent them?
Absolutely. So you're right. It is an incredibly diverse district and an incredibly competitive district, a district that Democrats typically spend anywhere between $250,000 up to $500,000 running campaigns here in any given election cycle. Because you do have the influence of the University of Idaho, you do have the influence of the Nez Perce tribe down in Lewis and Nez Perce County. And so it is incredibly diverse, and it's a perfect exercise in what we the people really truly means. I have learned so much by knocking on doors. You notice a difference in concern when you knock on doors in different areas. So if I'm down in the neighborhoods of Lewiston, people are very concerned about property tax, that kind of thing. If you go out to Lewis County, property tax is still an issue, but people are also concerned about agriculture, things like this. And then in Moscow, education is absolutely probably in the top. But I'd say if you talk to the voters across the district, almost exclusively their number one issue is property taxes. almost exclusively. You see other issues on there, but at the door, and I've knocked more than 2,000 doors to date, voters often bring up they're concerned about property taxes.
So what do we do about property taxes? Last
Yeah,
year, last year the the legislature passed House Bill 292. It reduced property taxes a bit, and this year the governor's school funding initiative moved some revenue for school facilities from property taxes to sales tax. So it's not really a tax cut; it's more of a tax shift. How do we take care of property taxes when there are so many different entities involved, counties and cities and schools and fire districts and library districts and mosquito abatement districts, all that stuff?
yeah. So first, I have a three-pronged approach for this, but let me give you my overarching philosophy first. So first, I don't believe that a tax on property or income is the most just or fair form of taxation. I believe that a consumption tax is more just or fair. And the reason I say that is because property tax, income tax, they tax success, they tax adding of value. So if you're generating an income, we tax that. And anytime you tax value, you disincentivize behavior. So if I let my house deteriorate into a slum, I'm going to pay less taxes than my neighbor who's constantly improving his home because his assessed value is going to go up. And so, on its face, any tax that taxes value, industry, penalizes adding value to the marketplace, I don't think is a good tax. Uh, but moving away from the property tax is something that's going to take a long time, a lot of work, and a lot of commitment. And people need relief right now. They need relief right now. So I have a three-pronged approach for addressing this right now. Number one, we've got to eliminate waste in the taxing districts. So before I ran for state representative, I ran for Latah County Library Board. And one of the things I found is that the library lays and collects $1.8 million in property tax revenue across the district. Great, right? They're buying books, they're keeping their buildings improved, they're putting computers in, right? Wrong. They're spending 1.1 million of that 1.8 million on salaries. And when I tell voters that across the district, their jaw hits the floor because that's an incredible amount of property tax money that's not going to the duties of the district. It's just going straight to salaries. I'm glad our librarians are well paid, but man, our seniors are having a hard time keeping their homes. And so one of the plans that I've called for addressing that is to cap the max rate of the max percent of the budget at 60% that can be spent on salaries for non-essential taxing districts. The second issue is that we're slowly losing the homeowners exemption. And so when the legislature, and I understand the argument about the homeowners exemption is simply shifting the burden from one group to another. And I would rather that we didn't have a property tax system at all, as I said, but it is inherently unfair to give someone a tax break and then slowly steal it away. And that's what's happening with the homeowners exemption. Originally, it was $100,000. In the last 8 years, the legislature has raised it to $125,000 from $100,000. So it went up 25%. But the problem is in the 3-year period between 2019 and 2022, home values went up 32%. So we're actually worse off than we were before. And so one of the things that I've been working with local county commissioners and candidates for county commissioners on is allowing the county commissioners to index the homeowners exemption up based on market value. So you would have a floor of 125,000 that it couldn't go below, but the county commissioners could adjust, could index that homeowners exemption up based on market values in the community. It's a much better plan than the legislature just reaching in and readjusting it, because the market in Kootenai County is completely different than the market in Ada County. And then the third and final thing is, I believe on your primary residence, when you retire, because most retired folks are on a fixed income, that we should freeze your property tax bill. Now, that's going to require a constitutional remedy because of the Constitution's requirement that property taxes be uniform. But I think it's inherently unfair. The whole system's unfair, but if we're going to try to be as just and fair as possible, it's inherently unfair to tax senior citizens on a fixed income a larger and larger portion of the pie when they have no means to generate more income, short of going back to work. And I've met senior citizens across this district that have said, Colton, I'm just going to have to sell. And I think that's immoral. So those are my three approaches to provide immediate property tax relief. But ultimately, we need to move in a direction of a consumption tax away from the property tax.
I generally agree with you about the consumption tax because it's uh, like you said, every other form of tax disincentivizes success, and a consumption tax is directly within your control. I can't, except I can make improvements on my house, but I can't control where the market goes or what my neighborhood's average value is. However, I can control what I buy. If I feel like I'm spending too much in taxes, I can just cut back and not buy as much. Or if I don't mind, I can buy more. Uh,
Yeah.
that seems like a tough sell, though. I know the grocery tax is a big issue for people. People want the tax removed from groceries, and the idea of sales tax. People will point out that it disproportionately affects people with lower incomes than higher incomes. And it used to be that conservatives weren't really concerned with that, but I think a lot have bought into this idea that taxes should be structured in a way to take more of a percentage from those with more money.
Yeah, I don't think that's just or fair at all. Because then what you do is you disincentivize the earning of more money. Now, and I come at this from a unique approach, right? Because everyone says, those greedy rich capitalists that they just want a bunch of money and they hate low income people. And I'm here running for office. I'm not a homeowner. I rent. And my annual gross income is less than $35,000 a year. And I see taxation that taxes value and disincentivizes certain behavior as bad for me. Because what it means is that if I latch onto that promise of America and I work hard 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, that hard work is going to be penalized. And so I don't think that's right. And I'll give you a quick example as to why consumption tax is fair. Here in the state of Idaho, we fund our transportation issues a couple of ways. One is a fuel tax, and the other is we have highway districts that lay and collect property taxes. Oh, and the highway districts also raise revenue through titles and registration and that kind of thing. And that's how you catch electric vehicles because they don't use fuel. So, what is more just and fair? To tax someone who's using an automobile on public roadways or to tax someone who owns a home or property? To me, it makes a lot more sense to tax the person that's actually using the road, commuting and so on. And it would also it also does catch, our fuel tax actually does catch out of staters that travel on our roads and fuel up as they travel, rather than shifting that burden to property tax. So there's the perfect example of where the consumption tax is actually more just and it's more fair because it ties the act of consuming to the cost of maintaining it instead of shifting it onto homeowners.
Do you have any ideas how to get something like that through the legislature? Obviously, you said it'll take a long time, um, but
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, getting things done, even things that seem like they're common sense and make sense, it's difficult, and it's
Yeah.
designed to be difficult.
Yeah, when we're talking about moving from consumption tax to no, I'm sorry, from a tax on value to a tax on consumption, I think that's a great place to start. Is reworking the structure for funding the highway districts. It shouldn't be tied to home ownership so much as it should the consumption and use of the roads. But this is the bigger issue. This strikes at the bigger issue here. If we shifted our entire revenue source from all the systems of taxation that we have now to a consumption tax, our state sales tax would be 38%. That's ridiculous. And no one wants to pay 38% taxes, but it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. You are paying 38% taxes. They're just getting you with 10 different bills on your property and your business and your income and this thing, that thing, and the other thing. And the rest of the money that they don't have, they get from the federal government that borrows it on the backs of your kids and grandkids. So really, when we're having this conversation, I think the conversation needs to shift to why is government so big and why are we spending so much money?
Well, over the last few years, our state budget has gone up dramatically. A lot of that was COVID money, ARPA money, federal money. And this year, a lot of that, dried up, it expired. And I think the last I heard, our budget went up by about 1.6 or 1.7% from last year, which is good, but you know, it's like a massive freight train moving one direction. How do you turn it around and actually start reducing the size of government and the scope of government and the amount of money that they spend? Every year, all the agencies come with their budget requests. The governor comes with his budget requests, and JFAC goes through and they start from last year's budget and just go up from there. And every line item increase has somebody who is very passionately advocating for it. And you get to the House and Senate floors, and somebody has a good reason to support everything from the, Hispanic Commission to the, Commission for Libraries to the Bean Council to Idaho Public Television. There's always somebody advocating for it and why we should keep it. How do you actually start reducing what we spend?
Yeah, so the first thing is that you have to start addressing scope of government, right? So as we keep asking the government to do more and more and more and more, government that incurs cost. And so an example is we recently, the last two legislative sessions, have expanded the Department of Natural Resources to have jurisdiction over deer antlers that shed naturally. When you do that, when you grow the scope of government, that's going to grow costs. And so then these agencies come back and they say, well, we have all these legislative duties that we have to do. Well, yes, that's true. And that takes money. Yes, that's true. And the reason they have those legislative duties is because we empowered them with that and we grew government, and then that incurs the cost. Hey, Brian, is there any way we could pause this interview for just one moment? My daughter's crying and I need to go run and see what's up with that.
Sure. I'll cut this out.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll be right back. All right. I'm sorry about that.
Hi.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. All good.
So I need a clapperboard so we can see where to cut it off. Okay. So you want to keep going on that subject, or just I can ask a different question?
Yeah, no, that's it. When we grow the expectation of what we need government to do, that is going to incur expense. And then the agencies are going to come back to us and they're going to say, well, we need money to do the job you empowered us to do. And that may be true. And so much of the conversation about budgets is the conversation about how can we, as thriftily as possible, fund the agencies to do the jobs we've empowered them to do. But you can only go so far with that, because at the end of the day, most of the expense is incurred by all the duties and powers that you've given government. So the best place to start when you want to cut spending is by taking away the scope. No, the Department of Natural Resources should not be in charge of policing antler sheds. That is a terrible idea. And you just go down the line and eliminate the scope of government. And no, the state of Idaho does not need a state bingo board. What's that about? And you eliminate the things that you've empowered government to do. And as you shrink the scope of government, the cost of government is going to shrink with it. So essentially, we're currently with the budget process, we're fighting a battle about how cheaply can we run a huge government. And the answer is you could run a small government for a lot less.
Well, as the saying goes, though, the closest thing to immortality on Earth is a temporary government program. Once they're there, they're very hard to get rid of because suddenly people are dependent on them. They have employees. And you're going to, if you advocate eliminating a department or cutting back its duties, you'll have a front page story in the Idaho Statesman about how you want to put all these poor employees out of work and how are they going to feed their families? And then the people who depend on it. When Representative Redmond came up with a bill that would put some guardrails on Medicaid expansion. Hundreds of people signed up to testify because they were going to, or they feared that they were going to lose these benefits that they were dependent on. I think we've crossed some threshold. I don't know if it was recently or 100 years ago where government decided to get into the business of doing things that it saw as beneficial, and I think a lot of Republicans even buy into that. So how do you get something through amidst all that you know pressure to actually eliminate some government programs or return government to a scope of just protecting life, liberty, and property?
Bingo. And that's exactly what the founders said government existed to do. It says the Declaration tells us that to secure these rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, as the Constitution says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That's the purpose of government, to protect the rights of the governed. So one of the things about dependency is it's so often overhyped. People are told you need the government or these terrible problems are going to exist. Well, we have a host of historical examples where that's simply not true. So President Clinton signed welfare reform that moved cash welfare payments as a way of life. It removed that as an option. The result was amazing. Most of those people had jobs. Unemployment was cut to record lows. And he did that under pressure from Republicans. And that welfare cutting reform has actually been an incredible success. People are better off now as a result. But before that happened, everyone said, you're stealing the social safety net and you're going to throw moms and kids into poverty. And that's completely the opposite of what happened. The problem with government welfare or any form of government spending is it shortchanges the ingenuity, generosity, and power of the individual. It tells them you can only be your best when we write you a check. And that's a lie. You can be your best when your power as an individual is unleashed in the marketplace. This idea that we need government to keep us safe. Senator Scott Herndon up north, he is he's in construction when he's not in session. And Boundary County does not have a building permit requirement. And Bonner County has something like a $30 application fee or notification fee. But there's no permit required to build a building. You just have to pay the county a notification fee and you build a building. So I asked Senator Herndon, I said, how many slums have gone in since there's no permit requirement in Boundary County? And he said, none. Why? No one wants to pay for a slum. But here's this idea, oh, we need the government to have a permit requirement and regulation on buildings so I don't accidentally buy a slum. And the truth is, it actually drives up the cost of your home when government regulates. You don't need the government to keep you safe from accidentally buying a slum. The market does that just fine. You're going to pay for good craftsmanship. And so many of these government programs, you will be better off if you're allowed to prosper as an individual instead of giving up more of your liberty, more of your rights, more power, and more taxes to the government.
Yeah, that reminds me of House Bill 545 this year. So the city of Boise had put in an ordinance that, if not required, at least made it very difficult to avoid taking Section 8 and other federal housing vouchers for landlords. And uh, some folks got together and put through a bill that would prohibit such ordinances. Say that private property owners can choose who they want to rent to, whether they have federal assistance or not. But as part of that, part of the ordinance was kind of an implied rent control. And that, of course, totally distorts the market because if you can't raise your rents, you don't have any incentive to improve or fix things up. And so it's government interference that actually creates the conditions for slums, not the free market.
Absolutely. And so I actually, that was Representative Mitchell's bill, right? Yeah. So I talked to him, and our county chairman up here is Dan Schoenberg, who owns Palouse Properties. And he was very instrumental in helping write that bill. And I talked to them and I said, so what, can you explain to me what's going on here? And what it is when you require that individuals have to accept this federal housing assistance, with that, the houses that are rented out, the units have to meet certain federal standards. And many, many units that are perfectly good units just don't meet the federal standards because the paint is peeling in a corner someplace or something. And so what ends up happening when you have that requirement is you actually take more units off the market, and you create an artificial housing shortage that drives the cost up for people and drives the cost up for the taxpayer who's paying for the housing program. And so everyone screams and cries about this government program will make people better. No, people are worse off because of the government program. There's less housing available. The cost of housing goes up, and it's way more expensive for the taxpayer. So far from helping you find a house, this government program that was addressed by HB 505 actually hurt your efforts to find a home.
Now, your opponent, the incumbent, to her credit, voted in favor of that bill. But one that she voted against, and in fact, multiple times, was the library bills. And that's been a contentious issue here for several years across the entire state. What are your thoughts on that? How much of an influence should the state government have in deciding, what material should or should not be allowed in libraries? And, where do you draw that line? How should that whole situation be handled?
Absolutely. So this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, because while my opponent was down in the legislature and couldn't make up her mind what to do 2 years ago, or I guess it's a year and a half ago, the legislative session of 2023, I was running for Lakeville County Library Board, and the Republican Party platform says that local governments it says power is the power closest to the people is the best form of governance. And I agree with that, which is why I ran for library board, to try to address these issues on the local level. Now, that said, this is how I explain the issue to voters, because so many voters, when you knock on their door, they're concerned about book banning. That's what they've been told. Sometimes book burning, right? And I have a conversation to them. I say, listen, I grew up in a family. My dad was a U.S. Army veteran. I was 8 years old when my parents let me see the movie Saving Private Ryan, which is an incredibly graphic war movie. When I told my wife I saw Saving Private Ryan at age 8, she was horrified, right? But different families are going to have different standards, and they're going to know that their kids are at different maturity levels. And at this point, the voter that I'm having a conversation with, they're nodding along. Yes, this makes sense. And then I say, do you think Saving Private Ryan should be in the kids section? Well, no. And that is the only thing, and it wasn't even violent. That is the only thing that these bills did. They said when it comes to sexually graphic material, libraries have to take reasonable steps to make sure that those are not available to minors. If we can agree that Saving Private Ryan is a great movie that shouldn't be in the children's section, why would it make sense not to have similar standards for obscene material? Well, a kid can get worse things on their phone. Yes, I know. Here's the difference. I'm not paying for that 12-year-old's phone, but I am paying for the materials in the library. So we do have a vested interest in that. And so that's been my position. I think it's quite reasonable. We don't want to ban books. We want libraries to take reasonable steps to protect children from obscene materials. And the statute was very explicit in what that was, in defining that. I think it did a great job. I think they did a lot of improvements. And the last thing I'll say on that is this. The left told us that this would result in a flurry of frivolous lawsuits. Okay, we'll see over the next year. We'll see if, to borrow the words of the governor, that stinking bill causes all the problems that we were told it will. And if it does, we'll come back and we'll fix it. But if it doesn't, the left, which I suspect it won't, the left is going to have to explain why fear-mongering was their go-to tactic.
Well, we'd like to think they're going to have to explain, but I don't think they're actually going to. They'll just move
No,
on to the next issue.
they won't. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that one brought together the people on the far left who think that children seeing things that are sexually explicit is actually a good thing because it opens their minds to alternative lifestyles and all that stuff. But then there's
But
people.
they controlled the narrative.
Yeah.
So the normal voters that I talk to here in Moscow, they don't believe that by any stretch of the means. They're concerned about book banning because that's
Right.
the line that's been pitched to them. So really, it was just about controlling the narrative.
Because you have the Republicans who voted against those bills. That was their narrative, that this is all just about book banning. This is just about you getting, taking control of things. And besides, it's not really a problem. Even Senator Chuck Winder, the president pro tem of the Senate, in 2022, he called House Bill 666, which would have removed the exemption in law that says that school teachers and librarians can give materials like that to children. He called the bill to remove that crazy, and he and his other, his committee chairs made sure it didn't get heard in the Senate. But this year, I heard him say in committee several times that he once thought there wasn't an issue, and then he saw what I think his granddaughter's friend brought home from school, and he said, "Wait a second, that's actually on the school on the children's shelves." So it's really just a matter of showing people, okay, we're not talking about Huckleberry Finn here. We're not talking about To
No.
Kill a Mockingbird. We're talking about books that are very explicit and obscene, and this is what they are. So it's a matter of waking people up to what's actually going on. Things are worse than you think.
Yep. I agree.
So, so what else is going on? Property taxes, library books. Looking at your website over here, looking at protecting Idaho energy and water. That's actually not something I'm super familiar with all the issues going on there. So what's going on? How does it relate to your district, and what are you planning to do?
So Idaho's 60% of Idaho's energy comes from hydroelectric power from the dams. And there is a clamoring from radicals on the far left and environmental activists to tear down those dams. And particularly for North Idaho, for my district, that number is well above 60%. The 60% number is for the whole state, but well above 60% of our energy, the way we keep our lights on, comes from those dams. And so I'm 100% committed to protecting Idaho's dams. They started in Klamath, in Oregon, tearing down those dams. They're moving to Washington to tear down the Snake River dams. And the chairman of the Nez Perce tribe was quoted by the newspaper saying that the removal of dams in Washington is a blueprint for dam removal in Idaho. And that's where this is going. It started in Oregon, moved to Washington, it's coming to Idaho. And there's a group of folks that want to tear down the dams, and it would essentially vaporize 60% of our state's energy industry. What can the state of Idaho do? Number one, Idaho's dams are different than Washington's dams. Washington's dams are owned by and managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Idaho's are private. We need to maintain that private ownership. Number two, when I got in this race, I said that Attorney General Labrador should intervene in the Nez Perce tribe's lawsuit to tear down Idaho's dams. And I called for that in September, and he intervened in December and is now litigating on behalf of the state of Idaho in that lawsuit. And I think that's great, and the legislature should support that, and we should provide the funding to empower him to fight for that, because it is not, well, it would be absolutely devastating and tragic if you vaporize 60% of the state's energy industry. It would at least triple our electric bill. The average electric bill in Idaho is $98 a month. If you want to pay $300 a month, then tearing down the dams is for you. But most folks don't want that. The results would be devastating. And so the legislature absolutely needs to continue supporting the Attorney General, funds that legal initiative to make sure that we protect those dams from the folks that want to tear them down.
That is an interesting issue that goes across all sorts of different places. You have the Lava Ridge wind farm proposal out east, which wouldn't, first of all, wind power, I think you and I would agree, is not efficient and not a good way to generate electricity, but it wouldn't even come to Idaho. It would go to California, but it's on federal land, and the federal government will make the decision. And it seems like the federal government is wanting to get rid of these things, and even one of our congressmen is supporting it, which it doesn't make sense to me. You mentioned the Nez Perce tribe. Have you had conversations with tribal members or leaders? Do you have a working relationship with them where you have conversations?
Yeah, we've reached out to different folks that are involved in that community, done a lot of door knocking down in Lapway. The tribe itself and the leadership of the tribe is supporting and funding my opponent. I've spoken with the council, not the legal counsel, the attorney representing the Nez Perce tribe, doing legal work for them, and we've had some really good conversations learning about those issues. And the truth is, if you get elected, you have to represent everybody in your district, and you have a duty to protect their rights as well. And one of the things that I say to tribal members that are very apprehensive about my position on the dams is I say, listen, you've heard the phrase, we all bleed red. Well, guess what? We all pay up in green. And so increasing the electric bill hurts everybody, and it hurts the tribe too.
Well, we should probably address one elephant in the room. You're in a three-way race, and there's a couple of these throughout the state that I've been watching. And in almost every case, with a few exceptions, it seems like you have an incumbent who is perhaps out of step with their voters. And I think that invites challenge, because you get a lot of people looking at it and saying, wait a second, this representative does not represent the values of this district. They're vulnerable. I can do better. And then you get 2, 3, 4, 5 challengers. So how do you stand out in such a race? How do you have to convince people not only that you're a better alternative than the incumbent, but also that of the 2 challengers, you're the best choice. How do you make that message clear?
I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life, and I adhere to the Republican Party's platform position on the right to life. I believe life begins at conception, and that taking an innocent human life is wrong. And I believe that the government has a responsibility to protect human life from the moment of conception. And both of my opponents take exception to that provision of the platform, and that's a non-starter for me. But there's also the issue of electability, and that is, if you're gonna bet on a horse, you want to bet on a winning horse. So when this election got started, I said, if by January I don't raise more money than the third guy in the race, I'll drop out and I'll back him. Well, he raised 3,000, I raised 13,000. Now I'm up to 17,000, and he's still at 3. It doesn't come close to what Representative McCann has raised, but it does make a major difference. The next thing I said is, well, all right, if the legislative district endorses the third guy in the race, I'll drop out and I'll endorse him too. Well, the legislative district voted, and they voted 22-3 to endorse me over him. And he did not drop out. He was asked to. He got a lot of calls from across the state saying, hey, listen, this isn't the time to split an election. So there's the reality that I have the broad grassroots support. Representative McCann has had 3 local donors that have donated to her campaign. The third guy in the race has had 1 that's not related to him, and I've had more than 50. So I have a really broad base of local grassroots support that is backing me, that's supporting me. The Central Committee is on my side. The donors are on my side. I've knocked on thousands of doors. The voters are on my side. There is a concern about vote splitting, but to me, it comes down to 3 issues. 1, electability. I'm way ahead. The right to life. I'm pro-life. I adhere to that position on the platform, and the other 2 don't. And then third and finally, we started knocking doors in January. We're thousands of doors ahead of anybody else in the race. And you're going to see a major difference in that on election day because we've been talking to voters and we've been taking our case to them.
It'll be interesting to see how it turns out, and along with all the other races. You mentioned the pro-life abortion. Obviously, after the Dobbs decision, that debate went from the national level down to all 50 states. Here in Idaho, we have pretty solid laws banning abortion, which is great. First of all, do you think they should be strengthened even further, taking away some of the exceptions that exist, looking at abortion pills or, traveling out of state. And then second, how do you prepare the people for what is surely going to be a campaign to get an initiative on the ballot to legalize abortion?
Great question. Number 1, the circumstances of a person's conception does not determine their value. A human life is a human life, and a human life is precious, regardless of how tragic the situation of their conception. And if we obfuscate on this issue and we say it's okay to kill human beings because of tragedy associated with them, that's a dangerous road to go down. Number 2, you're right. Most abortions are carried out through abortion pills, which flood into Idaho through mail order abortion. And there's a number of states, Tennessee, Arkansas, that have supported legislation to prohibit that practice. I agree with that. Number 3, ballot initiative seems to be the go-to policy practice of the left when they cannot get their policies implemented in the state legislature. And I've never been a fan of mob rule by direct democracy. I think it invites a lot of problems. One of the things that I've seen with ballot initiatives is advertisements and so on that are simply fraudulent, that lie to the voters about what it does. And when you go into the polling place, you don't have hours to read 60 pages of legislation. You want to vote and get out. And so that ad you heard on the radio that told you the content of that ballot initiative is going to be a pretty powerful determinant in how you vote. And so I've seen the downright lies that have been used to push these ballot initiatives by the left. It's not ethical. I don't think the process should exist in the state of Idaho. I'm thankful our Constitution is protected from initiative process. And headed into this, one of the best ways to drive turnout from both sides and not just one side is put a second ballot initiative on that does the opposite thing. So a constitutional amendment to define life as beginning at conception is something I've called for, I've supported, and I think the legislature should pass that one as well.
Oh, I like to think that the voters of Idaho would, make the right choice if that was the choice. But I don't know. Our culture's, in many ways going in the wrong direction. Obviously, public schools, entertainment media, news media, everything is pushing us one way, and it's hard to hold the line against that. Speaking of schools, though, that's also a big debate here in Idaho. Now, most everybody agrees we have school choice in that parents can enroll their children in private schools, homeschool, micro schools, charter schools, public schools, whatever. The question is, should tax money follow those children? And that's been a huge debate. Obviously, your opponent is the vice chair of the House Education Committee, and that's been where a lot of school choice bills have gone to die. Last year, an ESA, Education Savings Account, died on the Senate floor. This year, a tax credit died in its committee, in the Rev and Tax Committee. So it seems like all these other states are doing something with money following the child. Idaho, it's a tough sell. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you support, and how would you get it through?
Yeah, so I support an income tax credit. I think that's probably the best way, and the reason is it doesn't create more government overhead or administration. I'm open to other forms of school choice. I'm open to working with people. Just letting people keep their own money and letting them manage their money themselves through an income tax credit, I think, is an absolutely genius way. I am concerned about growth of government when we start talking about voucher programs. Okay, who's going to administer that? Who's going to be in charge of managing all the paperwork? Is that going to grow the size and scope of government? And with that, are we going to create a framework that allows for the regulation of homeschooling eventually? So I'm concerned about that. Those aren't concerns that can't be addressed or worked with on legislation, and I'm happy to work with anybody on school choice. I do feel that an income tax credit is the most straightforward, quickest way to allow people to take their own money, manage it in their own way, and provide for their child's education. But you're right. My opponent has been absolutely opposed to any form of school or education choice outside of the public schools. And that's tragic. And she's killed a lot of bills to do that. And I live in a district where 30% of the kids are educated in an alternative form of education outside of the public schools. And so this is an issue that's very important to the residents of my district, who they do favor school choice and they support it. Interestingly enough, one of the concerns that my opponent brings up is she doesn't support a voucher program because she believes it would take public school dollars away and give it to non-public school students. Well, the income tax credit doesn't do that. It doesn't touch public school money at all. It's a completely different pot. It doesn't even touch public money, because an income tax credit is a matter of the government not taking individuals' money. So the fact that my opponent has opposed that, which I think is a meager and earnest proposal, is just it's incomprehensible.
And of course, many of the people that oppose any form of money following the child for K-12 support the launch grant, which takes $8,000 of taxpayer money per student and sends it to, private organizations, businesses, trade schools. So I don't see the consistency there personally.
Exactly. Completely agree.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want people to know? Anything we didn't cover here? And what can people do to find you and support you?
Well, let's address the other elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I'm a young man, and a lot of people, they meet me, they come to my events, they like me, they like what I have to say, but they say, I don't know. You don't look like the politicians we've elected for the last 50 years. So I want to tell people about the nation that I love. The nation that was set into motion by a group of young men in their 20s and 30s. Men like Thomas Jefferson, who was 33 when the Declaration of Independence was signed. James Madison, 24. Alexander Hamilton, 20 years old. And I believe that if our founders, a group of men in their 20s and 30s, could bring the British Empire to its knees and set the greatest nation known to man in motion, but surely a 25-year-old running for state representative can't be that remarkable. The truth is, this election is not about resumes. It's about resolve. It's about whether or not we have someone that has the energy and the passion to fight for liberty and fight for our rights in Boise. And I'm prepared to be that candidate. I'm running to be that fighter and stand up for the values of other folks. And so We've come a long way as a nation. We've come from a group of men in their 20s and 30s that pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, the best and brightest years they had to offer, to fighting for their nation's liberty. And we've switched. And now we have a bunch of politicians who use their sunset years to cling to government power and try to acquire yet another government pension. And we're simply not better off for it. The fact of the matter is that we need people who have skin in the game, who actually care about liberty and are willing to fight for it. I'm running to be that candidate. I'm running to be that state representative, and I'm asking for folks' support. And if they want to pitch in and help me out or learn more about me, they can go to my website, bennettforidaho.com, bennettforidaho.com.
Colton Bennett running for Idaho House of Representatives, District 6, Seat A. Thank you.